Welcome to another episode of Relocation Leader. I'm your host, Zac Turbes, and today we have a pretty awesome discussion for you. We have Jeremy Kedziora, the Hyperpower Endowed Chair of AI at Milwaukee School of Engineering, and Dar Andrews, the CIO of NEI Global Relocation, and we're going to be talking all things AI. So stay tuned, and let's jump into the conversation.
Powered by NEI Global Relocation. This is Relocation Leader, the podcast where we help advance professionals in the world of global mobility. Now, here's your host, Zac Turbes.
So, Dar, why don't you give us a brief introduction on yourself?
Sure. My name is Dar Andrews. I am the CIO for NEI Global Relocation. Have been with the company for about a year and a half. Prior to NEI, I was with Home Instead, leading their IT organization. And prior to that, spent some time, about 13 years with eBay and PayPal.
And Jeremy, well, for our listeners, why don't you kind of introduce yourself?
Yep, happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Jeremy. I am an associate professor at the Milwaukee School of Engineering, and I also hold an endowed chair focused on artificial intelligence and machine learning.
I hear from every direction, whether it's Sam Altman, Elon Musk, or other voices that, we're careening towards AGI. But I also know that maybe there's some financial incentives for them to be making some of those statements. You being a little bit more objective, I think, could you kind of help us discern sort of where we're at and which way things are going?
Yeah. I think you and everybody else wants to know about that, right? So I'll confess up front. I thought it would be a fun thing to take your questions and ask ChatGPT to answer them. So I have some answers from ChatGPT on these things that I don't entirely believe, right? But I think it'd be interesting to share them nonetheless, right? So ChatGPT's view on that question is that we are at an inflection point where AI has moved from research labs into mainstream business and daily life. And then it goes on to say a bunch of other things. That's kind of true, right? We are at a bit of an inflection point in the sense that AI has moved from a situation where it's like an experiment or a science project, right, into something that's practical and usable, right? And this happened because in October or November or December or so of 2022, OpenAI went viral, right? That's essentially what happened. And we had a gentleman from NVIDIA come out to our campus to give a talk on something, and he knows some of the folks at OpenAI who do this kind of work, and he said they were like shocked at how viral they went. They expected this to be kind of a cute little toy thing. And it exploded, right, in a way that people were kind of surprised about. So we're at this like point where AI is serious, right? You can seriously use it to do serious things. At the same time, I don't know that I believe we're at an inflection point where AGI is a little bit away. First of all, I don't even know what that means unless you give me unless you give me a definition of what AGI means, right? So. I think that's one of the areas where every one of these folks who like talks about this on LinkedIn posts or because they're the head of a AI lab, right? They always speak in generalities about AGI, right? I don't know what it means. No one really knows what it means. No one agrees on it. So what people have done in the past is they've said, okay, if an AI passes these tests, then we'll call it an AGI. No one agrees on what the list of tasks should be that an AI should pass to become an AGI. And no one really has a good definition of what an AGI is. So to me, it's all a little bit fuzzy. As you said, these like big heavyweight economic actors have strong incentives to say, oh, we're on the verge of AGI or we're on the verge of superintelligence. But that doesn't mean anything unless you tell me what that in turn means. So I think we're at a practical use inflection point, right, where AI is going to start to get forward deployed and actually used for stuff. I'm not sure that we're at an AGI inflection point. I don't think that I buy that.
I'm there. I'm there in the same sense. I think for repetitive tasks, AI has proven itself to be very, very useful, and very much it augments what humans can do. But to Jeremy's point, I just don't think in terms of doing true reasoning and maybe true inventing new ideas or new products or capabilities, it seems like we're a ways away. I don't know if that's 2 years, I don't know if that's 5 years, but it feels like we're still a ways away.
Because the question's really not, can humans take these and create novel inventions or putting things out into the world that are beneficial and new, but can the AI itself do those things? Am I correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a major goal, right? Is, can we have an AI system that innovates, right? Whatever that means. I think one thing to keep in mind, right? There's a couple things to keep in mind, right? So like machine learning, which is the basis of artificial intelligence these days, is really good at interpolation, right? It's really good at taking a bunch of data and looking at the spaces between the data points that you have and kind of filling in the gaps. It's really good at that. Not as good at going outside of the data that you started with. That's actually pretty dicey problem to solve, right? So not so good at extrapolation. So if it kind of depends on what you think what innovation is, right? If innovation means going outside the corpus of human knowledge to do something new, I think it might be kind of dubious that an AI would be good at that, based on machine learning techniques. The other thing is that, the artificial intelligences that we're working with today, these large language models, right? They do a great job at taking a sequence of stuff and predicting the next word. That's what they do. That's all they do, right? So there's fancy ways for them to do that, but ultimately that's all they're going to do, right? So you can imagine, right? That's maybe not the same thing as having a complicated concept in your head that you want to put words to, right? Those are kind of different tasks in some sense. And there may just be fundamental limits, especially for innovation, right? In how well a fill in the blank next word, solver can do it, things like that.
When I'm looking at how we have evolved our use of AI, and just sort of as an observer, and we use it quite a bit, but when it first came out, it was, look at this generative AI that can, I can give it a prompt, even a highly detailed prompt, and it can spit out a really rough, starting place for me to work with, on maybe whatever concept I'm trying to get out there in, like an article or whatever. I think one of the things that I'm noticing is we're moving past just the pure generative, make me an image, to now we're giving these AIs access to different tools and we're letting them make decisions for us. And that seems really new to me. That is true. It has amplified in my mind the use cases for what you can actually ask AI to do,
So 2025, right? There's been a heavy focus on what are called agentic systems, right? In the research community. And I think that's for a couple of different reasons, right? Agentic systems have been a big focus, right, over the last year. And I think there's a few reasons for that. Number one is that, large language models are hugely expensive to develop and to train. They require huge amounts of information. They require massive compute that's very expensive. And, this is tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to build these big foundation models, these big LLMs, right? So only a few players are going to be able to do that, right? So what's everybody else going to do? Well, everybody else is going to take these things and use them for stuff, right? Build onto them, add onto them, right? And I think that's been one of the reasons why people have really kind of, especially researchers, right, have done some of this work on agentic AI in the last year. The second reason is what I said a few minutes ago, right? If you think there's going to be some diminishing marginal returns to the development of large language models themselves, well, then how do you keep AI moving forward? You got to give those large language models access to tools. You've got to give them access to additional capabilities, beyond just training a bigger model. And I think that's one of the reasons why folks have moved in that direction. But I think you're right. Agentic AI has been a thing. It's moving the problem from a machine learning science, let's figure out how to do AI type thing, to a practical, software engineering problem, right? How can we layer on a bunch of other stuff, create a good closed system and make it deployable, right? So that it works well and it's, intelligent, right? From the perspective of the downstream user. The long-term use for these things is now you can kind of think about giving them control over a task instead of just, hey, answer my prompt. I have colleagues who work at, a local kind of tech-heavy company, and their goal is to have every developer think of themselves as the manager of a team of AI agents. right? And so it's like, they go to their AI agent and they say, hey, write code to do this, right? Integrate these software tests, right? And then please, do a merge request and check it in, right? To GitHub, right? So it's an agent that's doing this entire task, right? And I think it doesn't just have to be software engineering; it could be anything. So I think that's kind of what you're feeling right now, is this kind of like interest in using AI for these kinds of things.
Yeah, and to that point, that's exactly how NEI has approached, the usage of AI within the engineering space. Cautiously, because we don't give any exposure to PII data or client data or transferee data. But in terms of quickly converting code from old code sets to newer code sets that are becoming our standards, well, that's, as long as it's anonymized, that's exactly what the AI engine does, just incredibly quickly, as opposed to still have to research and do a little bit of analysis on it to make sure, this is exactly what we want, and obviously with testing, but it just augments, the engineering capabilities of the entire team. And I think Jeremy touched on it before, that the next, where I see this kind of going, is whether it's self-driving, which we've seen with XAI and Grok and the Teslas, or whether it's into the robotic space. But that's probably where the next, kind of augmentation, the next set of tools that are going to be available to AI to really take that next level of advancement. It's still going to be repetitive tasks, but it's going to be extending the capabilities of the AI to be more physical versus just as prompting.
That's where I was going next, because, when you're looking at the generative AIs, I did not see what could be done with the agentic AI coming next. And now that we're here, that's always my next question, is like, well, what's after that? And I think Dar gave some good pointers on, it's probably going to invade our physical world. But do you have anything else you want to say about kind of where this could be headed, and maybe over the next 1 to 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the great question in some sense. AI and robotics, right? My part of AI is reinforcement learning. Where you want to train like a decision maker to handle some sort of long time horizon task, like a self-driving car, for example. And I think that part of AI and increasingly like large language models, they're very kind of robotics friendly. And I think, those are going to be tightly intertwined going forward. I know you can see all kinds of really cool videos, on YouTube of like Google training robots to play soccer using reinforcement learning and other AI techniques. You should expect an increasing entry into physical spaces of AI, in a way that we haven't had so far. The rest of it, though, is really quite hard, right? I think what you can expect, though, is that you're going to see incremental progress in the ability of AI systems to be multimodal, right? So that they can take in your voice and a picture and a document, right? And do something with those things in a holistic fashion. I think you're going to see a lot more of that. I think people will explore the agentic reasoning space, and try and really build out, what are all the ways we could possibly take these agents and have them work, in some kind of iterative fashion to approximate something that looks like human reasoning. I think you're going to see a lot more exploration of that. I'm not sure you're going to see a lot more improvement in capabilities, though. That's not so obvious to me. I also think that you might start to see a change in the way that the big AI labs conceptualize what they're trying to do, right? So it seems to me, and I have friends who work in Silicon Valley, they've told me that for the past like 20 or 30 years, the goal of big tech companies has been to replace white collar jobs, right? Automate white collar jobs away. And I think that kind of informs, even to this day, that kind of informs the way that folks at the big AI labs talk about what their AIs are, going to do. I would guess, though, that there might be kind of a shift away from replacement and towards kind of augmentation, right? So like, rather than let's take you, Mr. Worker, and, get rid of you and just replace you with an AI, it's really more like, let's give you AI tools to help you do your job 10 times, 100 times better. I think, that's the kind of thing I could totally imagine happening in the near term. And that's a much less steep requirement, right, on AI performance. That's way easier to satisfy. And so it's probably way easier to monetize, right? And so I think there might be some strong incentives to do that kind of thing, or switch the narrative a little bit towards that.
For every one job that may get replaced, there may be 5 new ones that are created because of all these new, capabilities and all these new fundamental technology advancements that we can't even imagine right now. The iPhone came out in 2007, and think about having a device that powerful that's in the palm of your hand. All the jobs that it spawned, it's like, well, yeah, that's, now hindsight, it's like, oh my gosh, that was phenomenal. I think the same thing is going to apply from, again, the boogeyman concept with AI and then some of these other ancillary capabilities. But I'd love to hear Jeremy's thoughts on that.
I have 2 points of evidence on that. So here's how I think about that, right? Economists have studied, because I'm social science adjacent, right? I can cite the economists, right? So economists have studied this kind of stuff for 200 years, right? They have very sophisticated methods to think about what's going to be the impact of a shock on labor, right? Or on capital or whatever. And you can think about, in general, you can think about, well, if there's a shock in the efficiency of labor, like if labor gets way more efficient, right? What impact would that have on things? And I think that's kind of where the AI thing sits, right? It impacts the efficiency of labor. It makes people potentially much more efficient than they, already were. The question is how quickly, does that kind of happen, right? And exactly what is the impact across different kind of, parts of the labor market? So if it's a large, quick impact, right, then I think people probably lose jobs. If it's a small or slow impact, then I think people probably don't lose jobs. So the question is, which of those 2 kind of scenarios are we heading towards, right? And I got kind of 2 pieces of evidence on this. I think we're heading more towards the small, slow scenario, in which you're going to see a lot of augmentation, but maybe not a lot of job loss. And I don't know if my evidence is dated at this point or not. I kind of surfaced this earlier this year, but this is my sense of it, right? So first of all, there's a very well-known Nobel laureate professor at MIT, an economist who studied this kind of thing, and asked exactly this question: what's the impact of AI on labor going to look like? Should AI be considered as a boogeyman, right? And what he argued was that, well, no, based on the data that he looked at, something like 5% of U.S. jobs will be directly impacted by AI in a real serious, big, fast fashion. That's not all that many, as a percentage of the entire labor market. And beyond that, I think he argued, again, he's not making stuff up, right? This is modeling and data, right? He argued that the impact on GDP growth would be something like 1.5% over 10 years. So that's not trivial, but it's also not a giant unanticipatable shock, right? So that's one piece of evidence that suggests we might be heading towards the slow, or small end of the spectrum. The second piece of evidence comes from the World Economic Jobs Report from 2025, where people, kind of look at and study the labor market across the world and ask, right, what's changing, and so on. So they did a really interesting thing. They asked ChatGPT, hey, tell me, ChatGPT, of these 1,300 different job tasks, what are you really good at, and what are you really not good at, right? And then they took those job tasks and they binned them into kind of job families, software development has these 100 tasks and so on. And what you can see is that there's no task, there's no kind of job family in which ChatGPT's assessment of its own capabilities suggests that it could entirely replace that job family, right? Not one. And for most of them, it couldn't even replace the majority of tasks in that job family, right? So again, the implication is that you're going to see, potential for augmentation of people, but not replacement of them. So if you buy all that, right, then we shouldn't think of AI as a boogeyman, right? We should think of it as a great opportunity to be able to do more cool stuff, and maybe focus our own efforts on things that are more interesting, fulfilling for us, right? I don't like writing emails about things to people, I'd rather just say, hey, write me an email about whatever, right? and I think if we can kind of do that writ large, then everybody's happier, right? In some sense, maybe there's somebody who wants to write, just spend their whole day writing emails, right? Cool, good for them, right? But maybe a lot of us don't like that, right? Don't want to do that anymore. So let's leverage AI in this way to augment our ability to get work done, especially uninteresting rote tasks that we could care less about.
As AI reshapes how decisions get made and tasks get done, where will human skills create the most value? And how should companies rethink where they place their top talent?
Well, what a great question. Maybe I should let Dar take that one first.
Yeah.
Actually in charge of allocating talent, and I'm not.
Well, I'm back to relationship building. I think that's where, at least not in the near term, we're probably not going to have AI companies, working with other AI companies and in term without humans involved. So I would say if I was going to point my my sales teams, my CRM teams, even my IT team, I think it's in that relationship building space. And it's, you can look inwardly, within the company and to improve efficiency and improve overall, corporate performance. But I would argue that relationship building really needs to go outside the company. And it wouldn't just be to your clients, it would be to your suppliers, and it'd be to, if you've got regulatory agencies that you're engaged with. I mean, that's where I would focus my attention.
One of my questions sort of asked after thinking about this question a little bit more was, is it going to redefine what we consider top talent? Like if AI, like you said, is augmenting the person, to where it can handle most technical tasks, are we going to hire more for imagination and creativity? Like how is it going to change who we consider top talent if we're not talking in terms of top technical, capabilities? I don't know. That's something I thought.
So, ChatGPT's answer to this question I thought was kind of interesting, right? So it reflected a little bit of what Dar just said, right? Human skills such as creativity, critical thinking, ethical reasoning, and emotional intelligence will become more valuable. AI handles scale and speed, but humans provide context, nuance, and judgment. And I think that's reasonable, right? So what's the uniquely human value, right? What can we do that we think maybe AI can't do effectively or won't do as well? So, I kind of go back to some of the things we were talking about a little bit ago about like interpolation versus extrapolation and innovation. I don't see, under the current AI machine learning paradigm, I don't see AI being super good at that set of tasks. I see that as like maybe an area where humans might do a bit better. I also think that set of tasks is probably one of the major ways that you can get competitive advantage, right? Like do something new, do something innovative and interesting. Yeah, you can always cost cut, right? If you want to, I suppose, but that's the place where you blow up value, I think. And so like those kinds of things, creativity, innovation, those are going to be areas where humans can continue to add a lot of value. And I think that's kind of how I imagine a good pairing of an AI, an AI agent with a human would emphasize the human's role in those things. As far as top talent, I think redefinition of top talent is a possibility, right? So like, it's unclear to me if you pair humans with AI agents very effectively, it's unclear to me if that has like a leveling effect, right? So that, it brings up it kind of makes everybody sort of, the same, right? Or if it's going to be really a complementarity type of thing where the best just get super good, Both of those scenarios are plausible from my perspective. Maybe everybody gets better, right? At everything, but the best get a lot better, and the worst get, a little better. I don't know which scenario we're heading for there. I think either of those is possible from my perspective. And it might also be dependent on the particular issue area, right, that you're working in, right? So like maybe if you're talking about software development, maybe it's a leveling effect. So that a junior developer, right, suddenly can act as though they've been in the industry for 25 years, right? But maybe that's not quite so true with like, marketing marketing development or something like this, right? I also totally second what Dar said about the human element with relationship building, right? I think that's clearly an area where, humans have so much value and really kind of have cornered the market on that. And the AI is not going to replace that anytime soon, in my humble opinion.
Yeah, I think it does have a lot to do with the task, because, when and it depends on, how much back and forth, I guess, there is with you and the AI, but you still have to understand, you have to sort of conceptualize the end goal. When the AI is giving you, a response or an output, you still have to have a knowledge base to be able to assess if we're heading in the right direction so you can get to that end goal. And I think that certain human intellectual capacities or whatever, like those are still going to be necessary for various complex tasks in order to still arrive at that complex goal. So I can't see in all scenarios where it would be a leveling effect, but in a lot of scenarios, probably, yeah. So maybe it's like a both and,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah, maybe just to add to that, I think about sales events. It's very, I think a human can evaluate, hey, do I have to be strong in this event? Do I have to be a little bit less, maybe a little less forceful, or even more empathetic, where an AI engine just probably isn't going to be able to interpret those situations as well as a human. And that's where I think that relationship building comes into play, but also being able to interpret those situations.
Yeah, there's still so much intuition involved in human interaction that you're not sure that the AIs can really develop that when it's sort of just a human thing. As roles evolve, so that maybe some of that 5% that is more impacted by AI, what responsibility do companies have in helping employees adapt and grow? And what responsibility falls on individuals to stay relevant and contribute in new ways?
Well, I'm not an executive in charge of the talent pool, right? I'll be curious to hear from the executive who is, right, in maybe just a minute here, but I do have a kind of thought on that, right? So I think it's I think all parties here have a responsibility, right? I think, when I think about the people who I've worked with, who I'm most impressed with, who I most wanted to be around, right, who I learned the most from, they were all people who were continuous learners, intellectually curious, always pushing their own boundaries, whatever that topic, might be, right? And I think, those people impress me, and I think everybody should be like those people all the time. Just leave AI out of it, right? That's like what you want, right? I think in your workforce, you want people who want to grow, who want to get better and smarter and more capable and more, right? At least in my humble opinion, right? So I think individuals, taking it back to AI, individuals have a responsibility to be curious, to want to pursue these things, to want to learn about them, to want to understand how they can integrate them into their lives, right? Don't stick your head in the sand. That's irresponsible, right? That's foolish. I also, though, have a very expansive view on the responsibilities of companies, right, towards their workforces. And I think, if you want your employees to be good at AI, you probably need to have some kind of enterprise AI tools available for them to use, right, at a minimum. And beyond that, you probably want to give them the space and time they need, right, to develop familiarity with those tools, right? Like, Friday afternoons, do something cool with AI, and a lot of that's not going to work out or be useful or generate dollars, but it might generate, individual development, which will generate those things later on.
Jeremy hit it spot on. I think it's up to both the company and obviously the employee. But this is another area where not all employees are the same. Jeremy touched on it, that you have to provide the opportunity and the tools, and I completely agree with that. But then you also have to figure out what will inspire those individuals to, embrace the new technology, to embrace, actually trying it out and seeing how it affects their particular performance, their particular job. At a minimum, I guess kind of what I try to promote is promoting the idea of being creatively lazy. At least try this new tool. If nothing else, it's going to make your your task that much easier than what it would be otherwise. If we can do it in a third of the time, or we can do it in maybe a fourth of the time, that's even better yet. So I've been a pretty strong advocate in terms of adopting AI. I truly think that if companies aren't, especially with our size and probably, smaller, that their relevance in their marketplace is going to diminish, quickly over the next, I don't know if it's the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, but it's going to diminish. And so those companies and the large companies, we've seen it, those companies that have really embraced it are moving fast, and typically they're maintaining market share or growing. Those who have sort of been on the back burner of it, you're starting to see them kind of slide back. And I think it's a joint. It's a contract between the employer and the employee. They've got to invest their time, but we also, as at the corporate level, have to invest into it ourselves.
Yeah.
And I would, if I could build on that for just a second, I think there's kind of two options, here, right? If you kind of buy what I was saying earlier about like AI increasing labor efficiency, right? There's two options any company has, right? Either you do the same with less, you cut people or whatever, you did the same amount of work because AI made everybody more efficient, or you do the other one, right? You do, more with the same, right? And so like, if you adopt that, then this is like a tremendous opportunity, right? To really kind of push the boundaries on what you're capable of doing. And viewed from that perspective, it's kind of like, to me, a no-brainer as a company. I would be like jumping all kinds of hoops to make these tools available to people, right? And to give them the incentives to use them creatively.
Yeah. Especially when you consider that, like, when anything has happened to where like it's been a giant leap forward, how many things failed before that ever happened, right. But it's just the act of going through these motions that it seems like there's nothing that's happening for a while, and then all of a sudden just bam, like you leap forward. So like, we give employees awareness of working with all these different tools, and they're starting to be more cognizant of all the things that AI can do. And then like a light bulb, something happens to where they just realize a relationship between different tools, and they come up with something, a process, something that just really works, and that can leap you forward, Well, I think that was an engaging discussion. I want to thank you, Jeremy, for coming on our podcast and, sharing your wisdom. Thank you, Dar, for adding so much to the conversation. I really appreciate it. Well, Jeremy, we're just going to dub you our resident AI expert. So
there you go.
Probably talk again.
I think that's perfect.
Pleasure. Yeah, my pleasure. It was a great conversation.
So that was another episode of Relocation Leader. Thank you guys for joining, and we'll see you back in 2 weeks.
This has been Relocation Leader, the podcast that helps advanced professionals in the world of global mobility. Today's AI discussion had more great content than we could fit into one episode. To see the rest, sign up for NEI All Access by visiting neirelo.com/all access. We'll see you next time.